Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Now, Seth, we do have a little bit of a correction to make from our last
we've been
episode.
making a lot of corrections lately.
Well, technically there's a correction you made in the last episode, but then I deleted the correction. But it was the fact that we did not do a Turok episode yet.
We did do a Turok episode.
No, we have not done a Turok episode.
I thought that was in the episode.
No, I cut out the part where I found out that we didn't do one. I just left it at you being like, if we didn't do one, we'll do one. So the truth is we haven't done one.
Oh, because you had to do some deep research into the archives?
I sure did. By that I mean I went to our Podbean, I looked up Turok, and I saw that we had no episodes.
Yeah, I did that with Wizardry. That didn't turn out the same way.
Because you spelled Wizardry wrong.
Oh, well, that's true. I was looking for lizards.
Lizardry.
Oh, man. Well, it happens. Well, so then we are going to be doing a Turok episode possibly soon. So if you're excited about Turok, it's not this episode, so...
No. It's not that soon.
However, if this is not the episode that's the most recent one, perhaps you could just go find Turok and listen to that episode if you really want to listen to it. So, anyway, is there any other housekeeping corrections that we need to put in?
No. Anyway, Seth, what have you been recently playing?
Recently, I've been playing a game called Polybridge 3, which was released on Steam back in May 30th of 2023 and was developed and published by Dry Cactus and is the sequel to Polybridge 2 and Polybridge 1. I play the game on my phone because it's a fun bridge building game. And I was watching a YouTuber, Real Civil Engineer. He does engineering and video game content, and he was a civil engineer at one point in time. I think I mentioned him recently. But anyway, he was playing Polybridge 3, and I said when I was watching that, there's a Polybridge 3? I just remember Polybridge 1. I wonder what the differences in Polybridge 3 is. So then I went and did what every sane person does and downloaded Polybridge 2 and 3 and only played 3. I didn't play any bit of 2, and I'm just playing a little bit of 3 now. I don't know why I had to buy 2. I guess that's a completionist in me that I just had to own all 3. But anyway, so I got Polybridge 3, a place where you get to build bridges and try to solve puzzles. It's a great way to pass the time as you try to figure out how to get cars or trucks or jeeps across bridges, and sometimes there's problems like a boat or a plane that you have to build the bridge around or have like hydraulics, but then you also have a budget, which in real life they also have a budget, and you have to try to build a bridge while maintaining a budget that doesn't break, and sometimes that involves launching cars across the river in order to not spend money on building more bridge, which I feel like that's how our government should respond. They should just build bridges to the best that where a car could just pass it, and then they should say, good enough for us. And there's a lot of, trusses and all that stuff. You get to build with wood, roads, steel girders. You can build suspension bridges, drawbridges, spring bridges, and all sorts of fun stuff. There's a bunch of levels to play through, and they get more ridiculous as you go along. So it's a fun game. Polybridge 3. I recommend any of the Polybridges, though I don't know if Polybridge 1 works on my phone. It's told me that I can't play it anymore, which makes me mad because I bought it, but I just don't know if I just can't play it on this phone because it's too new or something. I don't comprehend how phone games work, but sometimes they just stop working on my phone. So there's that. Anyway, Zach, what have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I've been replaying Hotline Miami. I don't remember if I've ever talked about playing Hotline Miami in the first place, but I've been replaying it because I've played it before, many years ago. Hotline Miami was developed by Dennaton Games and published by Devolver Digital and released in 2012, making it actually a retro game by our standards. It is an ultra-violent top-down shooter where you play as a character who is known by fans of the game as Jacket, though he does not have an official name in the game. And Jacket is a mentally unstable man who gets instructions from talking masks to kill members of the Russian mafia in an alternate 1989 Miami. Jacket is named as such because he wears a Letterman jacket. He also wears animal masks that give him various abilities, such as being able to start a level with an Uzi, and he is a silent protagonist. The game also does some things to make elements of his character an unreliable narrator, despite the fact he's not really narrating, but you'll have the reality around you distorted and such to make it seem like the perspective that you're seeing of Jackets might be not what's actually happening. The game does have a very arcadey feel to it. You bust into a room, there's a bunch of guys, you have to clear them out in a certain time frame, and you have a one-hit kill thing where if you get punched or shot, you just die constantly. So it's kind of about killing everyone as fast as you can without dying. And the violence is both over the top, but it's also kind of done as a shock factor, showing the carnage of the game in the sense that when you clear out a level, the carnage remains. It doesn't leave. And one thing that I think is handled really well is this kind of tonal shift the game has, which I think I was listening to a YouTuber talk about this before, but when they pointed it out, it really stuck to me. And when I was replaying the game, I really noticed it. When you enter a level in Hotline Miami, the music is this upbeat techno bop, and the music is like blaring, the lights are flashing, everything's just chaotic. There's like letters and words popping at you as you go massacring things. But once you finish a mission, it goes completely silent. And it kind of helps punctuate almost a horror of the game in that Jacket is not necessarily a hero. He is a spree killer that thinks he's doing something right. And I think that adds kind of a dynamic to the game that makes it from kind of an arcadey action game to being almost a psychological horror game, which is on theme with today's episode.
Yeah, I always enjoyed Hotline Miami. It's just a really kind of fun, frenetic type game that's a good way to pass some time.
Yeah, it is. Now, to get into today's episode, we're going to be talking about a game that we've kind of alluded to before. We've talked about the company that made this game, Sierra, a few times. At one point, we talked about them with a guest on the show back in episode 35 with Damien, as Damien was actually an investor in Sierra. So he loved Sierra, and we talked a bit about their history then. We've also bounced around and talked about various Sierra games in other occasions, talking about things like adventure games and such. But as a reminder to our listeners who don't want to go back to episode 35, although it's a great episode because Damien was great, Sierra was founded in 1979 by Ken and Roberta Williams in Oakhurst, California. Roberta Williams grew up in Southern California and met Ken in high school. Ken originally came from Indiana, but moved to California when he was younger. The couple would get married in 1972, which was only a few days after Ken turned 18. So they really were like high school lovers who would end up together. The couple would move to Illinois and then back to California, and Roberta would work for Lowry's Food as a computer programmer. Ken mostly did consultant work with his own company called Online Systems. So Ken would work as a programmer and a consultant, and he primarily specialized in IBM mainframes of that era. By 1979, the couple had 2 children, and they wanted to leave LA. They wanted to go somewhere quiet, they wanted to settle down, and there was a problem though. In order to move, you need to make sure that you move to somewhere where you can still have an income, and they needed a way to continue to make money because they were still kind of young by 1979. So they were coming up with ideas on how to make money living in this remote location. And while they were coming up with ideas, Roberta would go and purchase an Apple II. Roberta had a love for text adventure games, specifically Colossal Cave Adventures, and she wanted to come up with her own game. She was coming up with an idea on how she imagined games should be made, and she would work with Ken on developing a game influenced by Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. For the project, Roberta would draw pictures using the Apple II and a graphics tablet that allowed her to hand trace art that she drew on paper. Ken would end up writing a program to help other programs read images drawn in the application VersaWrite, which Roberta was using for her tablet. The game they developed would be Mystery House, released in 1980 as a mail order game. They would publish it under the same name as Ken's consulting company, Online Systems. Mystery House was a moderate success, selling 10,000 copies. Each copy had to be hand-packed into Ziploc bags by Roberta, and she would also provide hints for the game over the telephone.
That's kind of fun. Just calling into the hint line and talking to Roberta about Mystery House. Hopefully she was vague and cryptic in regards to her hints, and like sipping tea while handling these people's problems with their game.
Yeah.
That same year, they published Wizard and the Princess, also for the Apple II, but this time it was in color. The game sold well, selling around 60,000 copies, which allowed them to begin hiring staff. Soon, Online Systems became Sierra Online. Within a few years, the company had grown from just Roberta and Ken to around 100 employees, with over 10 million in revenue. And one of those employees would eventually be Metal Jesus.
Somewhere down the line, it was Metal Jesus.
They attracted the attention of venture capitalists and big names in the industry like Jim Henson, who tasked them to develop a video game adaptation of The Dark Crystal, which I feel like the way that we have worded this, it sounded like Jim Henson just wrote them like orders. And just sent them like a letter that was like, listen here, folks, you need to make a Dark Crystal game. And I don't know what accent that was. That was my bad Jim Henson. Anyway, Sierra would continue to put out hit after hit: the King's Quest franchise, Maniac Mansion, Mixed Up Mother Goose, The Dagger of Amun-Ra, etc. Our favorite being, of this group, Mixed Up Mother Goose. Because, if anything, the Classic Gaming Brothers are a big fan of Mother Gooses who are mixed up. By the 1990s, the tides of video games were changing. PC games were starting to delve into the world of pre-rendered graphics and full-motion video. Roberta decided that she was going to dip her toes into this revolution of video games and, well, the changing of the tides, as it were, by exploring a new genre, horror, which is not a genre that they really explored before. Well, no, not really.
No, not really. I mean, Mystery House was a murder mystery.
Yeah.
And they did a couple other, I think, murdery games, but they didn't really do horror the same way that Phantasmagoria would be.
That's part of the reason why they tipped their toes into doing horror, because they had a fear of being typecast into a very specific genre. And Roberta would pull influence from her love of horror, such as movies like Halloween, Carrie, and The Shining. Stephen King specifically would help inspire the tone and themes of the game that would become Phantasmagoria. Her plans for a horror game actually went back about 8 years reportedly, but she felt that computer technology hadn't quite gotten up to speed with her plan. However, when CD-ROMs hit the scene and got faster and faster, she knew it was time to really start working on her magnus opus.
She came up with a lot of different ideas, but the one that stuck would be a story that involved a novelist named Adrienne Delaney, who moves to a small mansion on an island off the coast of New England with her husband Don.
The thing about the coast of New England is that's where bad things happen.
Oh yeah, New England is very haunted. Now, the island is previously owned by a man who has the beautiful name of Zoltan Karnovac, and Zoltan was a magician from the 19th century, whose wives all died in mysterious ways. Adrienne is not afraid of living in this presumably haunted house of a person who had all these wives that died, because she thinks this new home will inspire her next novel, though things start taking a turn for the horrific. As a quick disclaimer, if you do plan to play Phantasmagoria, you should be aware that there is a depiction of sexual assault and rape, as well as themes of domestic violence. So if those things make you feel uncomfortable, you probably don't want to play Phantasmagoria, but I figured I'd at least put out that trigger warning there. Now, the script itself for Phantasmagoria would end up being around 550 pages when it was completed. If you're not sure if this is a lot of pages, a comparison would be that a Hollywood script on average is about 120 pages. In screenwriting, you're usually taught that a page is a minute of film. So 550 pages is 550 minutes, give or take. There were also some issues with writing the game, some of them coming from Ken Williams himself, who felt that Sierra should be focused on lower cost animated games, and he was also concerned about the level of violence and sexual assault that was in the plot, though Roberta chose not to remove anything from her script, as she felt it was crucial to telling the story that she envisioned. Reportedly, the writing process did take a mental toll on Roberta. For a period of about 6 months, she would read horror novels and watch horror movies, and she began to have nightmares while working on the script. So she ended up kind of tapering off her marathon of books and movies in order to kind of give herself a little mental reset. To make the game more appealing to larger audiences, Roberta did choose to break the game into chapters. The name itself, Phantasmagoria, came from a word that Roberta saw in a book about magicians and magic, specifically the history of magicians and magic. But it's a term used to refer to a technique used by 17th century magicians to show the quote-unquote spirits of the dead in a theater by using a magic lantern. It's a phantasmagoria.
Oh. I didn't know where it came from. I just knew it had a really complicated name, and we haven't talked about it. Now, the art direction in the game would be done by Andy Hoyos, with Kim White, Brandy Prue, and Brian Judy taking taking on the role of computer artist. The project manager would be Mark Siebert, who called the project much more of a technical and managerial problem-solving job than I ever envisioned. Graphics for the game would be rendered on a Silicon graphics computer, with the design of them being heavily influenced by the works of Tim Burton, the film Alien, and the film Hellraiser. The game has a ton of pre-rendered backgrounds, with around 1,000 being in the game. For comparison, the average game at the time had about 100 pre-rendered backgrounds. So there was 10x the number of pre-rendered backgrounds in this game. Due to the scope and scale of the game, they needed to employ various Hollywood agencies, actors, and special effects studios to bring it to life. The filming for the game was done on Beta SP tapes, with over 40 hours of footage being shot. Original footage would have to be mixed with pre-rendered objects like doors and chairs into the footage frame by frame. The programmers would end up setting the frame rate and resolution for the footage, as it had to then go fit on CD-ROMs and be good enough quality for players to actually understand what was going on in the screen. The final game would end up taking up a whopping 7 CD-ROMs.
Yeah, which is a ton for the time.
It is a ton.
As a comparison, Riven, which is a pretty large game, only took 5.
But like 250, I'm just trying to do quick math here, 1,000 megs, a gig and a quarter maybe?
Yeah, a gig and a quarter, yeah.
Or something like that. I don't know, I don't do math. Filming for the game took about 4 months, with 600 scenes being shot and shooting days taking about 12 hours a day for 6 days a week. While the game was projected to only cost $800,000, it would ultimately cost much more, to the tune of $4.5 million, which reportedly caused a bit of friction between Ken and Roberta, which I could see, especially since Ken didn't really want to do it anyway. He had questions about the game to begin with, and then Roberta's like, don't worry, it'll be fine. And he's like, okay. And then she's like, all right, it's going to be $800,000. And he's like, okay. And then they're like, no, just kidding, we need more money. And he's like, I have problems. And so he was pretty concerned about it being a big budget project and not being able to even break even. Part of the budget went to building the filming studio, which cost around $1.5 million. 25 actors were cast for the game, which doesn't include the animal cast of 2 cats, a Doberman Pinscher, a beagle, and rats, who I imagine would probably be on the cheap side compared to the actors. At least
right, but
getting
you have to pay the handlers.
Well, not for the rats if you're just releasing them.
That's fair. Apparently, though, the reason they had 2 cats is because the character of Adrienne has a cat, but the cats were really hard to work with, so they had to get 2 cats because one was obnoxious.
Cats are 100% always hard to work with. To be fair, they did build a studio for $1.5 million. Like, that studio could, in theory, be used again on a different game.
I think it was. Now, actors reportedly had some issues on the set, as filming was primarily done in front of a blue screen. And this was the 1990s, meaning that some of these actors had never worked against a blue screen, and they were, in fact, working against nothing, as in nothing was in front of them and nothing was around them. Some objects would be physically there, for example, if they needed to sit in a chair or at a table. However, these tables and chairs would be, in fact, blue, so that they could be digitally superimposed with the pre-rendered chair or table. One example of a difficult shot that the actors had to work with was in a scene where the character Adrienne is being strapped to a chair with a guillotine overhead. The actress who played Adrienne reportedly just had issues finding a way to show genuine emotion in the scene because she was literally working against nothing. So the shot took a few takes, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was a reoccurring problem of just actors not being able to show the proper emotion because they're literally working in a void. There's kind of a famous scene from the behind the scenes of the shooting of The Hobbit, the recent Hobbit movies done by Peter Jackson, where Ian McKellen is sitting in the Hobbit hole of Bilbo's house in a completely green room with some sticks with balls on them, and he just looks at the camera and he says, I'm a Shakespearean trained actor, and he looks so sad. And it can be hard for actors to work against nothing. I think they do a better job with it in modern times, but back in the 90s, this was kind of a unique experience. Notably, a fun piece of continuity, though, that does occur in the game is the fact that Adrienne wears the same outfit for the entire game, despite the fact that the game takes place over 7 days, meaning she does not change clothes for 7 days straight. This was due to the fact, though, that the actions in the game can be repeated, and they didn't want the character to have to refilm the same scenes over and over again. Like if you go downstairs and you go into a different room, you would have to refilm that scene 7 times with 7 different wardrobes if you wanted to accurately represent someone changing clothes. So they opted to just have 1 pair of clothes for Adrienne. That being said, due to the nature of the way games are structured, filming did in fact require them to reshoot multiple scenes over and over again to allow for the narrative structure of the game to play out. Certain things happen in certain ways in games, and if a video game is not necessarily a linear progression the same way a movie is, action can happen in a different way, in a different time, in a different place, and you have to account for all these things when you're making a game like this. Special effects for the game would be done by the Character Shop, with most who are the Character Shop being a special effects studio out in LA. Most of the special effects being done in one take due to the tightness of the schedule. Some of the special effects included they had burn makeup, quote-unquote gallons of fake blood, and prostheses that were used for certain death scenes. The death scenes in Phantasmagoria are pretty gruesome. You can have your character have their head split open, you can lose limbs, and they show it in detail. I mean, it's special effects detail. It's not like you're actually watching someone die, but it is gruesome, and this is, 90s video game aesthetic.
Phantasmagoria was released in August of 1995 and quickly became an instant success. During its first week, 300,000 copies were sold, and the game grossed $12 million within the first week. And I bet Roberta gave a good long look at Ken, really gave him a look like, I told you so. By March of 1996, it's estimated that the global sales surpassed 600,000 units. The game also had financial success for Sierra, with the company's stock having a 73% gain from July to September, raising from $30.87 to $43.25. For the quarter ending in 1995, Sierra had a profit of $3.26 million compared to 1994, where they had a loss of $850,000. Despite the incredible sales, the game actually received mixed reviews from publications. Adventure Gamers gave it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. GameSpot ranked it 6 out of 10. Next Generation gave it 3 out of 5 stars, and PC Gamer rated it 88%. Critics were mixed on the amount of time the game took to make versus the final product, with the GameSpot review noting that long production does not translate into high quality. Others criticized the simple puzzles and familiar storyline, and while there were other reviews that were far more positive, with Dwight Silverman of the Houston Chronicle stating it was the best game of the year. The game also would earn a Editor's Choice Award from PC Gamer and the 1995 Best FMV of the Year prize from Computer Game Review, which is a category I don't think that we fill as much anymore.
Sadly, no.
I also want to think that, ultimately they did get reviewed mixed. However, they still made millions of dollars, and they made the game so it was a success. So, I'm sure they were sad about some of the negative reviews, but ultimately they probably didn't care. The game was not one without controversy, as CompUSA refused to stock the game and refused to comment on a specific reason on their choice not to stock it. Now, I just want to make a point that Ken and Roberta Williams recently released a game, The Cave.
Yeah.
CompUSA doesn't exist.
True, but at the time, CompUSA was the largest computer goods supply chain, and to have your game not be released into CompUSA was a big deal.
It was. No, it's for sure. And they believed that CompUSA didn't want to carry them because of the realistic violence. Parts of the game that, like the graphic violence, gore, and sexual assaults, also led the game being unable to be sold in Australia due to the Office of Film and Literature Classification refusing to classify it. Also, I believe Manhunt you couldn't sell in Australia. Some games just can't get into Australia sometimes.
Yeah,
they're too gory.
There's a period of time where Australia banned a whole bunch of games. In the US, it was believed by some that the game could reignite the debate that occurred in Congress just a few years prior, and there was serious concern by some people in the gaming sphere that Phantasmagoria could lead to Congress federally mandating ratings. And, that would have been interesting if Congress did step in and say, hey, the government rates your games, not the SRB. Just a fun little side note too regarding the controversy. Apparently the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System reportedly owned 435,000 shares of Sendent, the parent company of Sierra Online, which caused some further controversy controversy when they found out that they owned these shares. Senator Mitch McConnell and the governors from Arkansas, Iowa, and Tennessee all called for the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System to sell the stock, and McConnell made a notable comment on the sexual assault scene in Phantasmagoria as being part of his concern. The KTRS would choose to ask Sendon to stop owning Sierra, or else they would divest their stock. Now, beyond the controversy, Sierra would continue to just power on. In fact, they would go on to use the same technology that they used for Phantasmagoria to create The Beast Within, a Gabriel Knight mystery in 1995, meaning I think they might have used the same set.
Oh, and probably, yeah, or at least the same studio, yeah. At least the same studio.
A sequel would also be released, Phantasmagoria Puzzle Flesh, in 1996, which also came with its own controversy and also, to be honest, didn't score very well at all. But today, fun fact, you can find both Phantasmagoria and its sequel on Steam and GOG, and until February 5th, both games are on sale, which I think is the second time this has happened, where we've released an episode and a game's been on sale during the release.
Oh, and it's like a random classic game. I also like to think that because of the nature of Phantasmagoria, that it led to Harvester.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, Harvester, I think, owes a lot to Phantasmagoria. But that will do it for Phantasmagoria. I think Phantasmagoria is a really fascinating game. It has a really rich history, and the development behind it is wild. I mean, it was this large-scale Hollywood-style production for a video game, and probably one of the earliest examples of such a large-scale game. I mean, there were big games in the past, but this was a full-on movie production, like being done for a Sierra game, which it definitely wasn't the first FMV game, and it wasn't the first game to have all these filming sequences, but it just, the scale of it is kind of something to really be impressed by, and the fact that it was almost doomed to fail and it did succeed, I think is also kind of a testament to the strength that Sierra had, as well as the talent of Roberta Williams.
I was just looking through some of the special effects, or at least some of the scenes that they did, and there was one in particular. They have like that the character shop that did the special effects did, where they have a model cast of actress Victoria Morsel's head being pulled apart by strings to make it look like the demon was ripping the head apart. So they had like somebody with demon hands, and then they were pulling it apart by strings, and it looked like the demon was pulling it apart. After they get pulled apart, they would also keep putting it back together, which is why they had strings, because they only had one head model, because they were trying to keep some costs down. And after the filming was done, they would go on to put the head back together, and they took a picture with the actress and her head that was torn apart a million times.
The special effects are really impressive. I mean, they're all in-camera special effects in terms of what was done.
Yeah, practical effects.
Yeah, exactly. Practical effects, using just the techniques of the time, fake blood, prosthetics, makeup. I think there was a talk of having to reapply makeup to one of the actors because there's a scene where the actor's chasing Adrienne and she throws acid at his face, so they had to like keep reapplying it in certain places. But yeah, it really, really well done game. And I would say if you like horror, to check it out. Definitely if you're a fan of kind of more gruesome horror, to maybe check it out. So if you're a fan of like John Carpenter's The Thing, you might like Phantasmagoria. Well, getting into our retro rewinds, Seth had me play Kirby's Dream Course for the Super Nintendo. What a tonal change from Phantasmagoria. Because I think Kirby is the opposite of scary horror gore. Kirby is the sweetest thing in the world. It's just always happy. People. He does eat people, but like everything is always smiling in his world. Developed in 1994 by HAL Laboratory, Kirby's Dream Course is a mini golf game where you play as Kirby. The game is really fun. You literally play as Kirby, and you kind of like charge him up and knock him around, and he bounces off the walls and hits various enemies and items. You can get power-ups and stuff like that. And your goal is to either take out all the enemies and also to get the Kirby into the hole. And obviously you have to do it under par. The game is just a good time. I love playing Kirby's Dream Course. This wasn't the first time I played it. It won't be the last time I played it. In fact, I have a really good memory of playing it back in college with my friend Mikey. He invited me over to his dorm, and we just played Kirby's Dream Course for like an afternoon. It was great. But yeah, it's a great game. I love it. It definitely holds up. Seth, next week you can play Marble Madness for the NES.
Excellent. Will do. Now, Zach had me play Mally Mallard in Cold Shadow, or originally released as Donald in Maui Mallard for the Sega Genesis, which was only released in Europe in 1995. The game would go on to get ported by different developers and publishers for other systems after 1995, but the 1995 edition, the original release, was developed by Disney Interactive Studios and published by Sega. You play as Maui Mallard, who initially only has an insect-launching pistol, but later on in the game you can transform into Cold Shadow, who has a bow staff and is like his ninja alter ego. So you're either Maui Mallard or this ninja. So who's Maui Mallard, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Because of Disney's business model at the time, when they were doing any sort of development, they needed to leverage existing characters from their library into everything that they created. That was the rule. If you worked for Disney, which this game, the people who made this worked for Disney, and you wanted to make a game, you must incorporate a Disney character. So they created this Maui Mallard, who's being role-played by Donald Duck. Let's just step back for a second. Instead of creating a new intellectual property, the game is Donald Duck role-playing as Maui Mallard, who has an alternate identity of Cold Shadow the Ninja, which I feel like is a little bit more of like some kind of mental gymnastics versus just being like, this is a different character. Anyway, it's a mascot platformer that plays pretty alright. I would personally recommend a later release, such as the SNES version, as the Sega release for me was a little too dark, and it was difficult to determine what could be interacted with and what could not be interacted, and I felt like the controls were a little bit loose, but the SNES game was a little tighter and a little brighter and a little faster. So, but overall, it's a pretty decent platformer, especially if you're interested in Donald Duck double role-playing, then it definitely holds up, though 100% play a later version. Next week, Zach, you can play Super Mario Bros. For the NES, because why not bring it back?
Great. Sounds good. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone for listening. If you have any memories playing Phantasmagoria, let us know. You can do so by emailing classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. You can also check us out on our social medias. Just look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. And also visit our website, www.classicgamingbrothers.com. Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.